KSB students, families, and friends, and welcome to our second edition of the KSB Reading Pawprints. Today we'll be reading a middle school book entitled Refugee by Alan Gratz. And this is what the cover looks like. I recently read this book and fell in love with it. It tells the story of three adolescents who are experiencing a need to move away from their home to a different country. So I'm going to read just an excerpt of this book for you guys. It is available on Learning Ally, Bookshare, Audible, and from the Louisville Free Public Library in print, audio, and in a digital book. Refugee. Joseph, Berlin, Germany, 1938. Crack, bang. Joseph Landau shot straight up in bed, his heart racing. That sound, it was like someone had kicked the front door in. Or had he dreamed it? Joseph listened, straining his ears in the dark. He wasn't used to the sounds of this new flat, the smaller one he and his family had been forced to move into. They couldn't afford their old place, not since the Nazis told Joseph's father he wasn't allowed to practice law anymore because he was Jewish. Across the room, Joseph's little sister Ruth was still asleep. Joseph tried to relax. Maybe he'd just been having a nightmare. Something in the darkness outside his room moved with a grunt and a scuffle. Someone was in the house. Joseph scrambled backward on his bed, his eyes wide. There was a shattering sound in the next room. Shh! Ruth woke up and screamed in sheer blind terror. She was only 6 years old. "Mama!" Joseph cried. "Papa!" Towering shadows burst into the room. The air seemed to crackle around them like static from a radio. Joseph tried to hide in the corner of his bed, but shadowy hands snatched at him, grabbed for him. He screamed even louder than his little sister, drowning her out. He kicked and flailed in a panic, but one of the shadows caught his ankle and dragged him face first across his bed. Joseph clawed at his sheets, but the hands were too strong. Joseph was so scared he wet himself, the warm liquid spreading through his nightclothes. "No!" Joseph screamed. "No!" The shadows threw him to the floor. Another shadow picked up Ruth by the hair and slapped her. "Be quiet!" the shadow yelled, and it tossed Ruth down on the floor beside Joseph. The shock shut Ruth up, but only for a moment. Then she wailed even harder and louder. "Hush, Ruthie, hush," Joseph begged her. He took her in his arms and wrapped her in a protective hug. "Hush now." They cowered together on the floor as the shadows picked up Ruth's bed and threw it against the wall. Crash! The bed broke into pieces. The shadows tore down pictures, pulled drawers from their bureaus, and flung clothing everywhere. They broke lamps and light bulbs. Joseph and Ruth clung to each other, terrified and wet-faced with tears. The shadows grabbed them again and dragged them into the living room. They threw Joseph and Ruth on the floor once more and flicked on the overhead light. As Joseph's eyes adjusted, he saw the 7 strangers who had invaded his home. Some of them wore regular clothes, white shirts with the sleeves rolled up, gray slacks, brown wool caps, leather work boots. More of them wore the brown shirts and red swastika armbands of the Sturmabteilung, Adolf Hitler's stormtroopers. Joseph's mother and father were there too, lying on the floor at the feet of the brown shirts. "Joseph! Ruth!" Mama cried when she saw them. She lunged for her children, but one of the Nazis grabbed her nightgown and pulled her back. "Aaron Landau," one of the brown shirts said to Joseph's father, "you have continued to practice law despite the fact that Jews are forbidden to do so under the Civil Service Restoration Act of 1933. For this crime against the German people, you will be taken into protective custody." Joseph looked at his father, panicked. "This is all a misunderstanding," Papa said. "If you just give me a chance to explain." The brown shirt ignored Papa and nodded at the other men. 2 of the Nazis yanked Joseph's father to his feet and dragged him toward the door. "No!" Joseph cried. He had to do something. He leaped to his feet, grabbed the arm of one of the men carrying his father, and tried to pull him off. 2 more of the men jerked Joseph away. and held him as he fought against them. Isabel, Havana, Cuba, 1994. Isabel opened her eyes and lowered the trumpet from her lips. She was sure she had just heard the sound of breaking glass, but cars and bicycles kept streaming by under the bright sun of the Malecon like nothing had happened. Isabel shook her head, convinced she was hearing things, and put her lips back to her trumpet. Then, suddenly, a woman screamed, a pistol fired, pack, and the world went crazy. People rushed out of the side streets, hundreds of them. They were men, mostly, many of them shirtless in the 100-degree August heat, their white and brown and black backs glistening in the sun. They yelled and chanted. They threw rocks and bottles. They spilled into the streets, and the few policemen on the Malecon were quickly overwhelmed. Isabel saw the glass window of a general store shatter, and men and women climbed inside to steal shoes and toilet paper and bath soap. An alarm rang. Smoke rose from behind an apartment building. Havana was rioting, and her father and grandfather were somewhere right in the middle of it. Some people fled from the chaos, but more people raced toward it, and Isabel ran with them. Car horns beeped, bicycles swung around and pedaled back. People were as thick on the ground as sugarcane. Isabel weaved in and out among them, her trumpet tucked under one arm, looking for Papi and Lito. "Freedom, freedom," chanted some of the rioters. "Castro out! Enough is enough!" Isabel couldn't believe what she was hearing. People caught criticizing Fidel Castro were thrown into jail and never heard from again. But now the streets were full of people yelling, "Down with Fidel! Down with Fidel!" "Papi!" Isabel cried. "Lito!" Her grandfather's name was Mariano, but Isabel called him Lito, short for Abuelito, Grandpa. Rifles boomed and Isabel ducked. More police were arriving by motorcycle and military truck, and the protest was turning bloody. The rioters and police traded rocks and bullets, and a man with a bloody head staggered past Isabel. She reeled in horror. A hand grabbed her, making her jump, and she spun around. "Lito!" She threw herself into her grandfather's arms. "Thank God you're safe," he told her. "Where's Papi?" she asked him. "I don't know. We weren't together when it started," her grandfather said. Isabel thrust her trumpet into his arms. "I have to find him." "Chabela!" her grandfather cried. He used her childhood nickname like he always did. "No, wait." Isabel ignored him. She had to find her father. If he was caught again by the police, he'd be sent back to prison, and this time they might not let him out. Isabel dodged through the crowds, trying to stay away from where the police had formed a line. "Papi!" she cried. "Papi!" But she was too short, and there were too many people. High above her, Isabel saw people climbing out onto the big electric sign hanging from the side of a tourist hotel, and it gave her an idea. She worked her way to one of the cars stuck in the riot, an old American Chevy with chrome-tailed fins, still around from before the revolution in the 1950s. She climbed up the bumper and onto the hood. The man behind the steering wheel honked his horn and took the cigar out of his mouth to yell at her. "Chabela!" her grandfather shouted when he saw her. "Chabela, get down from there!" Isabel ignored them both and turned this way and that, calling out for her father. There! She saw her Papi just as he reared back and threw a bottle that smashed into the line of police along the seawall. It was the last straw for the police. At a command from their leader, they pushed forward into the crowd, arresting rioters and hitting them with wooden batons. In all the turmoil, a policeman caught up with her father and grabbed him by the arm. "No!" Isabel cried. She leaped down off the hood of the car and pushed her way through the pandemonium. When she got to her Papi, he was balled up on the ground, and the policeman was beating him with his nightstick. The policeman raised his truncheon to hit her father again, and Isabel jumped in between them. "No, don't, please," she said. The policeman's eyes flashed from anger to surprise, and then back to anger. He reared back again to hit Isabel, and she flinched. But the blow never came. Another policeman had caught his arm. Isabel blinked. She recognized the new policeman. He was Luis Castillo, Ivan's older brother. "What do you think you're doing?" the older policeman barked. Luis didn't have time to answer. A whistle blew. The police were being summoned elsewhere. The angry cop yanked his arm free from Luis and pointed his nightstick at Papi. "I saw what you did," he said. "I'll find you again. When all this is over, I'll find you and arrest you, and they'll send you away for good." Luis pulled the angry policeman away, pausing just long enough to give Isabel a worried look over his shoulder. Luis didn't have to say anything. As her grandfather arrived and helped Isabel get her father to his feet, she understood. Papi had to leave Cuba. tonight. Mahmoud, Aleppo, Syria, 2015. The afternoon adhan from a nearby mosque echoed through the bombed-out streets of Aleppo, the melodious, ethereal voice of the muezzin praising Allah and calling everyone to prayer. Mahmoud had been doing his math homework at the kitchen table, but he automatically put his pencil down and went to the sink to wash up. The water wasn't working again, so he had to pour water over his hands using the plastic jugs his mother had hauled from the neighborhood well. Across the room, Walid sat like a zombie in front of the television, watching a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon dubbed into Syrian Arabic. Mahmoud's mother came out of the bedroom where she'd been folding clothes and turned off the TV. "Time to pray, Walid. Get washed up." Mahmoud's mother, Fatima Bishara, held her pink iPhone in one hand, and in her free arm she carried Mahmoud's baby sister, Hannah. Fatima had long dark hair she wore up on her head and intense brown eyes. Today she was wearing her usual around-the-house attire, jeans and a pink nurse's shirt she used to wear to work. She'd quit the hospital when Hannah was born, but not before the war had begun. Not before coming home every day with horror stories about the people she'd helped put back together. Not soldiers, regular people. Men with gunshot wounds, women with burns, children with missing limbs. She hadn't gone nearly catatonic like Walid, but at some point it had gotten bad enough that she just stopped talking about it. When he was finished washing up, Mahmoud went to the corner of the living room that faced Mecca. He rolled out 2 mats, one for him and the other for Walid. Their mother would pray by herself in her bedroom. Mahmoud began without Walid. He raised his hands to his ears and said, "Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest." Then he folded his hands over his stomach and said a brief prayer before reciting the first chapter of the Quran, the most holy book in Islam. He bowed and praised Allah again 3 times, stood and praised Allah again, then got down on his knees, hands and knees, and put his head to the floor, praising Allah 3 times more. When he was finished, Mahmoud sat back up on his knees, and he ended his prayers by turning his head right and then left, recognizing the angels who recorded his good and bad deeds. The whole prayer took Mahmoud about 7 minutes. While he'd been praying, Walid joined him. Mahmoud waited for his brother to finish, then rolled up their mats and went back to his homework. Walid went back to watching cartoons. Mahmoud was just starting a new equation when he heard a sound over the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles theme song. A roar like a hot wind rising outside. In the second it took for the sound to grow from a breeze to a tornado, Mahmoud dropped his pencil, put his hands to his ears, and threw himself under the kitchen table. By now, he knew what an incoming missile sounded like. Shboom! The wall of his apartment exploded, blasting broken bits of concrete and glass through the room. The floor lurched up under Mahmoud and threw him and the table and chairs back against the wall of the kitchen. The world was a whirlwind of bricks and broken dishes and table legs and heat, and Mahmoud slammed into a cabinet. His breath left him all at once, and he fell to the floor with a heavy thud in a heap of metal and mortar. Mahmoud's ears rang with a high-pitched whine like the TV when the satellite was searching for a signal. Above him, what was left of the ceiling light threw sparks. Nothing else mattered in that moment but air. Mahmoud couldn't draw a breath. It was like somebody was sitting on his chest. He thrashed in the rubble, panicking. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't breathe. He flailed wildly at the debris, digging and scratching at the wreckage like he could somehow claw his way back to a place where there was air. And then his lungs were working again, raking in great gulps. The air was full of dust, and it scratched and tore at his throat as it went down, but Mahmoud had never tasted anything so sweet. His ears still rang, but through the buzz he could hear more thuds and booms. It wasn't just his building that had been hit, he realized. It was his whole neighborhood. Mahmoud's head was hot and wet. He put a hand to it and came away with blood. His shoulder ached and his chest still seared with every hard, desperate breath, but the only thing that mattered now was getting to his mother, his sister, his brother. Mahmoud pulled himself up out of the rubble and saw the building across the street in raw daylight, like he was standing in midair beside it. He blinked, still dazed, and then he understood. The entire outside wall of Mahmoud's apartment was gone. So hopefully that gave you a glimpse into the book Refugee by Alan Gratz and made you think that maybe you might want to read this book as well. It is about 317 print pages, regular print pages. So it's kind of long, but the story goes back and forth between the 3 characters that I introduced to you in this video. And it's a really interesting story about 3 young adults who are attempting to get out of countries that are treating them poorly and how they manage to get to safety. So if you want to check out this book, again, it's available on Learning Ally, Bookshare, Audible, and from the Louisville Free Public Library in print, audio, and digital book. Thanks for joining us for this episode of KSB Reading Pawprints. I hope that you'll join us for our next episode, which will be the high school episode, and then we will cycle back around into elementary episode and then another middle school episode. Thanks for watching. This video features the song Bubblegum Bowl Game by J.R. Tundra, available under a Creative Commons license. This video was created by KSB's short course program, Kirsten Price, protected under a Creative Commons license.